And those of you on Zoom, let me know if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Terrific, thank you. Meredith was coming off quarantine, and then it turns out she was close to someone who got quarantined, so she's back on quarantine.
Yeah, I didn't officially have to quarantine the first time. We're just waiting for test results.
Oh, no. I
We're
stand corrected
good.
by Meredith. She's waiting for test results.
That was the first time. And so now, like, one of my roommates has symptoms. So now we're waiting for her test results.
One of her roommates
quarantine again.
One of her roommates has symptoms, and now we're waiting for her roommate's test results. And so, Meredith, if she's positive, then you have to go back on quarantine?
Yeah.
Boy, life just sucks sometimes, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah. Way it goes. Okay, Jacob, Meredith, can you tell me if the slides move? Do the slides move?
No, they didn't move.
They're not moving? Let's try that again
No.
then. I don't know what the problem is. Okay, are they moving now?
Yeah, they're moving.
They're moving, okay. All right, good to hear. Yeah, this is Jacob and John. This is their last day on quarantine. I don't believe he's on quarantine.
I don't know where NBA.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, that's the last day for the baseball team.
According to what Jacob and John have told me, last day.
That's good.
Yes, that is good.
They got those all athletic practices for this week.
How about your,
Every team can't.
is this chair been clear? Is chair clear?
Well, they don't have bases. No, but they can't practice. Even if they don't have bases, they can't practice. So no athletes are in this.
Nice.
Yeah, because they don't want anyone in the mat or anywhere. Everything. I don't know. Like, do they still want people to be together, or is it like they're gonna actually be sitting around all the lot? Because you can still out, like, in the athletic room or like in the other workout room. So I don't know if they're just like, since so many people can't practice, they're just like nobody should practice. Right.
Okay, you folks on Zoom, keep in mind, if you have a question and you use the chat function, I will almost certainly not see it. I have an earpiece in with this Bluetooth. If you say something and ask your question that way, I will hear your question. So just unmute yourself and ask your question. If you do the chat function, it won't come up on my screen unless I move my mouse, which if I'm talking, almost certainly won't happen. So just unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay? All right. We have our skeleton. Where's Jess? Oh, that's right. Okay. All right. We have, yeah, okay. Trying to remind myself of everything else I read. Okay.
There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. So, Amanda, I feel like you're out there in the North 40. Okay, well, if you move, that's just fine. Okay. Let's have a word of prayer now. Let's begin. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Pray for those on quarantine. Thank you that our volleyball team is starting to come off quarantine, that they're well, no longer infectious, hopefully fully immune, at least for a while. We pray for today, for this time. Help us to learn of you, be grateful, and even awestruck. In Jesus' name, amen. Calcium. The calcium in the body is almost evenly broken between two types of calcium. This is extracellular calcium, by the way. So maybe I should clarify that by saying extracellular calcium is broken into two types: calcium that's diffusible and calcium that is not diffusible. Diffusible calcium can diffuse across membranes with the proper transport proteins. So free ionized calcium is involved in all kinds of cellular processes. So neuronal action potentials, for example, contraction of skeletal muscles, contraction of cardiac muscle, hormone secretion, blood coagulation. All of these are important processes. All of them require calcium. The second category is complexed or bound calcium. The positively charged calcium ion is bound to either phosphate or oxalate ions. Other types of complex calcium are bound to negatively charged proteins in the blood, which includes albumin, which would be the biggest one. So the resulting complexes of bound complex calcium are too big to come into cells and are therefore not usable for cellular processes. So the calcium blood levels, fortunately, will stay relatively constant because of the activity of three molecules. These three molecules are parathyroid hormone, vitamin D, and calcitonin. Can you see that red all right, or does it get lost in the glare?
No, it's good.
No, it's good? Okay. And Jacob, your colleagues may be asking you to take pictures of stuff. Just keep that in mind. Let's talk about parathyroid hormone first and the parathyroid glands that make parathyroid hormone. So the parathyroids are behind the thyroid gland. They're embedded in the thyroid gland, but they're embedded in the back of the thyroid gland. If you had the experience of dissecting a cat, which I know many of you didn't get that chance, if you take the thyroid and turn it around, you'll see two dark spots on the top and bottom of the thyroid. Those dark spots are about the size of this fingernail right here, your pinky fingernail. And some would say, oh, maybe size of a peanut, something like that. I would say a pea. A peanut would be a pretty darn big one. A pea would be a bigger, better description of it. But inside the parathyroid gland are so-called chief cells. Chief cells. These will synthesize parathyroid hormone. They synthesize it as a precursor. It then gets modified and clipped to a polypeptide of 84 amino acids and is then packaged into vesicles, secretory vesicles, where it waits to be released. Normally, the blood calcium level is 8.5 to 10 mg per deciliter. And if the blood calcium level dips below 8.5, the parathyroid will act to raise blood calcium levels. So parathyroid hormone raises blood calcium, raises blood calcium. So, very quickly, is calcium important for your body's function? Name one thing calcium is involved in the process. Muscle contraction. Name another one. I know he stole yours, but find another one. Well, by that he means skeletal muscle contraction. Yeah, it binds to albumin. It binds to albumin, yeah. Your blood runs and then it, thank you, blood clotting. Steve, no? Another one? Yes, it does, involved with bone microstructure, in fact. Rem? Cardiac muscle contraction. Aaron?
They took all the ones I was gonna say. Doesn't it have an ossification of bones too?
Yeah, plays a very important bone ossification. Amanda? You get the mule's end there. How about action potentials? Action potentials. Remember, voltage-gated calcium channels allow the release of neurotransmitters. So it's really important ion. Really important ion. Corinne, calcium in our body comes in two forms. Name one of them. And free. Free. And if it's bound, one of the things it can be bound to is albumin or otherwise known as Ram, help her out. Be a gem. Something. Phosphate, there you go. Phosphate, okay, what's the other one called then? Oxalate, oxalate. And Aaron, is bound calcium available to cells? No. Amanda, why not? Then you get called on first.
Not available because it's
Too big to enter cells, correct, correct. And Corinne, the parathyroid is going to help do what? And that will help do what to calcium levels? Raise it or lower it? Raise it. Very good. Raise it. Does it need? It's going to need free calcium because that free calcium, as we'll see, is going to bind to calcium detection receptors on the surface of the chief cells.
So the parathyroid, how does the parathyroid raise the blood calcium level?
That's what we're going to get to in just a sec. So if you, oh goodness, the glare on that is just awful. That's much better, it seems to me. So there are two superior, two inferior parathyroid glands. You can see they're not very big. If you have to have your thyroid taken out, then you usually will leave a little tissue to leave those because you need those for calcium. And if your surgeon can't because of surgical matters, then you might have trouble with calcium homeostasis. Well, you will have trouble with calcium homeostasis. No two ways about it.
So how is that corrected if they have to?
Then you're going to probably start to have, you can be treated with injectable hormones. That sort of treatment is not for the faint of heart. There are endocrinologists who just specialize in that kind of treatment. It's very difficult. Yeah. Yeah, not very fun. Okay, everybody shut your eyes. Normal calcium levels in the blood are? Units, please. Mg per deciliter. Know that number. Know that number. 8.5 to 10 mg per deciliter. Be able to get up and shave in the morning and say, normal blood calcium levels are 8.5 to 10 mg per deciliter, la 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 la, and so on and so forth. Okay, if I say low, I want you to know what low means. If I say someone's blood calcium is 6.4, I want you to be able to say, oh, that's low. If I tell you it's 14.2, I want you to be able to say, dang, that's high. So number, I want you to know that number, okay? So start remembering it right now, okay? And I will, in fact, here, let's just do what I do with my Bible quizzers. I'll spring it on you occasionally and say, what's the normal blood calcium level? And you can't look at your notes. You just have to recite it, just like my quizzers have to recite their memory verses. Very good. Now, on the surface of the chief cell is a special receptor. It's called a calcium sensing receptor. A calcium sensing receptor. And it's a G protein coupled receptor. If it's bound by calcium, you get a signal sent into the cell, and that signal tells the cell to mobilize internal calcium stores, and so the cell is flooded with calcium. So what happens when that happens? Nothing. Nothing. This will then cause the chief cell to do nothing. And that is a normal state of affairs for the chief cell. If, however, the chief cell is not bound by calcium, because calcium levels fall below, what? 8.2 mg per deciliter. You don't have this calcium flooding the cytosol of the chief cell. When that happens, the chief cell will now secrete parathyroid hormone. So parathyroid hormone is made when calcium levels fall below normal. Well, excuse me, it's released. It's released when calcium levels fall below normal. Parathyroid hormone will raise calcium levels in 3 different ways. And this slide kind of gives you a couple of those ways. First, it is going to act upon bone. And it's going to, I'm running out of room here. So the bone is going to bind a cell in the bone called an osteoblast. Osteoblast. The osteoblasts are the bone building cells. The bone building cells. Now, when the osteoblast is bound by parathyroid hormone, it will start to release cytokines. So, what is a cytokine? If Corinne took a little piece of paper out and wrote it, saying, boy, Prod has a really ugly shirt this morning. And she passes it to Jacob. And the note says, pass it down. Jacob says, I could care less what his sartorial taste is. And pass it to Andrew. And Andrew writes on it, yep, that's one ugly shirt. Then he passes it to Devna. And Deva then writes, would you guys please grow up? Then she passes to Rem. And then Rem just rips it up because they think you guys are all children. That is essentially a message that's sent around the room. That's what a cytokine is. It's a message, and cytokines are meant to signal over the short distance. So just like that little message that Corinne wrote about my sartorial taste, that's what a cytokine is. Not that Corinne would do that, but no. You just buy me a shirt, probably. Now, there are 2 of these, and one of them is called rankle. And the other one is called macrophage colony stimulating factor, or MCF. Now, what do these do? These are going to signal to a macrophage precursor, and they're going to cause a lot of these to fuse and become osteoclasts. And these will now dissolve bone. When you dissolve bone, you release calcium and phosphate. So that's the first place where the thyroid hormone makes its presence known, is in the bone. Now, you have a problem here. You've released calcium and phosphate. Calcium and phosphate combine together, and now your bone, your calcium, will be unusable by the rest of the body. So, you need to get rid of the phosphate and keep the calcium. What's the organ? you tweak to do that? Kidney. So the parathyroid hormone will then signal to the proximal convoluted tubule of the kidney and will essentially stop the sodium phosphate cotransporters from reabsorbing phosphate. This way, you keep phosphate in the urine, and now you have more phosphate in the urine. That's called phosphaturia, hyperphosphaturia. Phosphaturia, increased phosphate in the urine. Now there's one more thing that parathyroid hormone is going to do. It's going to increase the absorption of calcium from the gut. And to do that, it needs to recruit its vitamin D. Now, to explain to you how it does all this, perhaps we should talk a bit about vitamin D and its shenanigans when it comes to recruiting calcium from the GI tract. So vitamin D is made from cholesterol. It's fat soluble, but it starts out its life as something that is metabolically inactive. So there are two sources of vitamin D. One comes from plant material, the other from animal material. So there is a vitamin, which I'm just going to abbreviate VIT D2, and this is called ergocalciferol. Ergocalciferol. That's from plants. And since that's from plants, let's put this in green over here. Then there is a vitamin D3. And this is from animal products. That, I mean meat, things like that. And this is called vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol. Have you ever bought vitamins from the store? Vitamin D from the store? Did you notice it says vitamin D3? It's not actually active vitamin D. It's pro-vitamin D. Your body needs to activate it. And here's how it does that. So the cholecalciferol and ergocalciferol are physiological and active. So take them in, they reach the small intestine, they then get packaged to the chylomicrons, they get sent to the liver, and in the liver, they are going to, in the endoplasmic reticulum of the liver, both of these are going to be hydroxylated. So there's a 25 hydroxylase. And that 25 hydroxylase converts vitamin D2 into 25 hydroxy, ergo calciferol. And converts cholecalciferol into, can you guess? 25 hydroxy cholecalciferol. And this is mercifully abbreviated as calcifediol. And you might be saying to yourself, well, glory be, whoop-de-doo, it's active now. No, it's still not active. Now it needs to actually circulate and go through the kidney. And released into the blood, it will go to the kidney. And the kidney now, so let's just say kidney, in particular, the mitochondria of the proximal convoluted wheel this has a 1-alpha hydroxylase and that 1-alpha hydroxylase will convert both of these molecules into the active form known as calcitriol. Calcitriol is active vitamin D. Active vitamin D. Now you're probably wondering, what on earth does parathyroid hormone have to do with this? It turns out that this enzyme, 1-alpha hydroxylase, is induced by parathyroid hormone. Therefore, it contributes directly to the activation of vitamin D, to the active form. In the GI tract, it will increase the absorption, vitamin D will, calcitriol will, of both calcium and phosphate. And it does that by stimulating the synthesis of a calcium binding protein, calbindin D28K. Calbindin D28K. And now the gut absorbs a great deal more of calcium. So you increase the absorption, you decrease excretion, and you increase the production of calcium. And when calcium levels get back to above 8.5 mg per deciliter, I should have made you come up with that, it will then bind to those calcium sensing receptors and shut off the release of parathyroid hormone. Questions about any or all of that? It's a bit of a journey. but it's how you control calcium in the body.
So what? There's something activated that causes vitamin D28.
That's vitamin D activates that. That molecule can bind a good deal of calcium. It can hold 4 different calcium ions, and it stimulates calcium absorption. The cells will normally pump it out through the basement membrane into the blood circulation. The calvine essentially will store it, so now you have stores of calcium. Vitamin D will also stimulate the kidney to not release calcium, so you don't release calcium from the urine as well, because vitamin D will actually stimulate the production of calbindin D28K in the Prince cells of the collecting tubule. So you keep it, you make more of it, and you absorb more of it. All right, what about calcitonin? Calcitonin has a minor effect in the kidney. Where calcitonin does most of its work is in the bone. Calcitonin shuts down osteoclasts. It shuts down osteoclasts, so you'd have decreased bone resorption, excuse me. And a minor effect in the kidney, but the major effect of it is in bone. Calcitonin was given for osteoporosis. It's not given more. The FDA retracted its approval because post-marketing trials showed it really didn't work very well. All right, any questions about calcium homeostasis? Normal calcium levels are? Good job, gang. All right, we're moving on. Pineal gland, we've already talked about its production of melatonin and the regulation of that secretion by the suprachiastic nucleus. The suprachiastic nucleus receives input from the eye. There are specific ganglion cells in the eye. They're called M ganglion cells. Those M ganglion cells have a special perceiving pigment called melitopsin. And those M ganglion cells extend their axons to the suprachiastic nucleus. And the suprachiastic nucleus, if activated, means that you're seeing light. And that will inhibit the production of melatonin. If, however, the suprachiastic nucleus is quiescent, because your eyes are shut, you're sitting in a dark room, whatever, now you start to make more melatonin. And melatonin contributes to the sleep-wake cycle. Melatonin, as you can see, for those of you who have the biochemical eyes to see, is made from the amino acid tryptophan. And there is tryptophan in milk, and that is one of the suspicions that having warm milk before you go to bed can help you sleep, because it stimulates production of melatonin. However, placebo-controlled studies failed to confirm this. Because it will tend to break down the proteins and liberate the tryptophan, supposedly. I think it's phony. Well, according to my wife, more milk just makes you want to pee. But she will still try it to go to bed, and not sure why she does it. She falls asleep so darn fast anyway. She doesn't really need it. So some people will still try warm milk before bed to help them sleep. That's supposed to be the theory behind it. Again, I think it is codswallop.
Have you heard that turkey makes you sleepy?
Curcumin?
Say that turkey makes you sleepy.
Turkey.
Yeah.
Then why doesn't chicken? Because chicken has more tryptophan in it than turkey.
Yeah. I don't know. I've just always heard like after Thanksgiving. Like,
Yeah. Then chicken should as well. Boulder Dash. Boulder Dash. The amount of hormones in turkey is minuscule. Birds get a vitamin shot, and that's about it. They don't get hormones anymore. You can ask anybody in the food industry. That's bull.
So theoretically, it works, but it doesn't.
There's not that much tryptophan in milk. And the amount of melatonin you're going to make with warm milk really isn't that much. So count me skeptical. Count me skeptical. But yeah, no, it's melatonin. And it's usually in a 5 gram. That's usually what you get. Some are 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams. Some are 3, some are 2. This company called Life Extension sells a melatonin supplement that also has some other herbal stuff in it that's supposed to help you sleep. I can't pronounce half the herbs in them, but
Theoretically, how much melatonin could be made from down plastic?
probably varies from person to person because the transport of melatonin, transport of tryptophan into the brain is subject to genetic variation. And it's also subject to the degree of circulation through the brain, which also varies from person to person. So I don't know because it's going to vary, probably. Pancreas. Let's talk about the pancreas, just endocrine organ, because it's both. The endocrine portion are little islands, and they're called pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans. You have alpha, beta, and delta cells in those islets. The big ones for us are the alpha and the beta cells. So here is pancreas, and then the islands, as you can see, are shown in this picture here. The islands, because they're away from the ductal system that brings the exocrine enzymes into the duodenum. These islands, as you can see, consist of the stippled alpha cells, the not quite so stippled beta cells, and then there are delta cells, which are usually smaller. They're not really shown here. The alpha cells will make the peptide hormone glucagon. Glucagon raises blood glucose levels. And the beta cells will make the peptide hormone insulin, which will lower blood glucose levels. Glucagon stimulates the liver to degrade its glycogen stores and secrete that glucose into the blood, thus raising blood glucose levels. Glucagon also stimulates the degradation of fat by adipocytes. Glucagon is made when you're in the post-absorptive state. So about 4 hours or so after you eat, glucagon levels they're usually already starting to rise, but they usually start to rise pretty precipitously. And you will start to lose fat you'll start to degrade liver glycogen and what have you. Glucagon also stimulates the degradation of fat to acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl coenzyme A is then used to make ketone bodies. Ketone bodies. We'll talk more about this, but ketone bodies, ketogenesis is also stimulated by glucagon. These are organic acids that are used as carbon sources during the post-absorptive stage. And you can see the physiology of glucagon raising blood glucose levels through not just glycage degradation, but also gluconeogenesis and fat breakdown by adipose tissue so that you have material for ketogenesis. There's no effect of glucagon on muscle. Glucagon, bless you, will often work in combination with glucocorticoids, which do have effect on muscle. Beta cells will release insulin when glucose levels rise. You saw this in a lab you performed. You drank the disgusting glucola, and if you didn't upchuck it, your blood glucose level went up, and then it went down. And if we were to track your insulin would also go up and then come down. And as your blood glucose came down, the insulin would come down too. So after a meal, some of you have eaten lunch, some of you will eat lunch after this, your blood glucose level will go up, your beta cells will make insulin, and your body will then use that to take up glucose, your liver will make glycogen, your adipocytes will store fat. And if you don't have adequate numbers of beta cells, you don't make sufficient amounts of insulin, you have type 1 diabetes mellitus. Insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, that term has really fallen out of favor. It's not used anymore. Type 1 is usually the term that's used. If, however, you are resistant to the insulin that you make, you have insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes mellitus. This tendency to get this is inherited, but it is linked causally to obesity because of the diabetogenic peptides made by adipocytes. The thymus is an endocrine gland that covers the heart. After puberty, this gland starts to shrink. Mine is probably just a little scar over my heart now. Yours is probably, about close to half the size it was. Well, no, probably a little bigger. And it is the university for T lymphocytes. When T lymphocytes are born in bone marrow, they must become educated about what to attack, what not to attack, what to sensitize the immune system to, what not. So they go to T cell university. T cell university is the thymus. They go to the thymus. If they are T cells that react with your own tissues, they are eliminated. If not, they go through a maturation phase, and when they graduate, they are released into the lymph and the peripheral blood to act as mature T lymphocytes.
Is that when you get sicker easier when you get older? So
Yep.
cells are not
Yep.
starting to-
And vaccines, and have special vaccines. So the flu vaccine for people over 65 is a recombinant DNA vaccine that's very high dose because you need to give higher dosages to get the same immune response to it in an older person. Yep. And in fact, myasthenia gravis, which is a disease, musculoskeletal disease, characterized by weakness and drooping of the eyes and trouble with eye movements, is due to an antibody made against the motor end plate. Specific, it's against the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. This is almost always characterized with a thymoma, a tumor of the thymus. And by taking out the thymus, you can usually reverse the myasthenia gravis. So yes, in cases, that is the case. In other cases, there are genetic conditions, genetic predispositions that may cause you to make T cells that just may eventually react with your own tissues. That's why lupus, systematic lupus erythematosus, tends to run in families. So do other types of rheumatoid arthritis. All of those will tend to run in families. Then, of course, the gonads make sex steroids. We'll talk more about those when we get to the reproductive system. Both males and females make androgens and estrogens, but males make more androgens than estrogens. Females make more estrogens than androgens. And what have you. The major androgen is testosterone. The major estrogen in females is estradiol, 17 beta. There are others, though. Testosterone in males is made by the Leydig cells. In females, it's made by the follicle cells of the follicles in the ovary. The placenta, too. The placenta during pregnancy is a potent endocrine organ. Absolutely potent. And that's part of the reason why when you become pregnant, your body undergoes such profound changes. That's due to hormones that being made by that placenta. And two major hormones made by the placenta are HCG, hemochromatotic gonadotropin. That's the pregnancy hormone that's detected by pregnancy kits, home pregnancy kits. And then the somatotropin, which has effects similar to growth hormone prolactin.
Why do some women like eat the placenta?
Because they're ding-dongs.
All right.
There's absolutely no demonstrated benefit to doing that other than getting infections. Yeah, there's certain types of infections that you can get if you eat the placenta. Yes, certain animals do it in nature. The reason they do it in nature is that only placenta attracts predators because it smells. Also, many predators can smell hormones. So by eating it, you not only can utilize the nutrients, you don't have predators who can smell it. That's why rabbits will eat the placenta and things like that. Also, rabbits are herbivores. It's hard to extract a lot of nutrition. That's why rabbits have to eat all the time. If you've ever had a pet rabbit, you have to constantly feed it. And if you give it your fingers, it'll think your fingers are food too. Humans were never meant to do that. Don't do that. That is, I think I'm justified in saying, idiotic. Truly.
Weird and gross, but I was like, why?
Well, it's also
Why
idiotic.
they know?
Because people are stupid.
What reasons do some people give though?
Because animals do it.
They say they're gonna do
Yeah, animals also lick their private parts. Is that a good idea? Come on, people. Could we think about this here for just a second?
say that like it's got nutrients or something that the body needs that I guess.
Nothing a well-balanced diet won't give you. Yeah. The internet should be treated like a two-headed snake. Both heads have poison and can kill you. If you cut them off, bury it under a rock, because it might reflex bite you if you're not careful. Okay, folks on Zoom, does this move? Does this move, yes or no? Yes? No?
No, it's not moving.
No, it's not moving? Okay,
No.
let's try it again. Oh, crumbs. Oh, no, that's really not moving. Okay, now is it moving?
Yeah, it's moving.
It's moving. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, let's talk muscles. For you HES types, a lot of this will be review, but a little review never hurt anybody. So with this, we're going to talk mainly about skeletal muscles, talk about cardiac muscle when we get to the cardiovascular system. Smooth muscles are altogether different, and we'll just mention smooth muscles very briefly. So muscles are attached to bones. There are some muscles that are attached to skin, but most muscles are attached to bone. They, when they contract, they shorten, and by shorten, they're going to move, shortening, they'll move the skeleton. They'll move the skeleton. So that tension that they create, that will help move joints in a particular way. So the attachment of the muscle has one end that doesn't move quite as much, relatively stationary. That's a so-called insertion. That's the origin. And then the one that moves more, at least, than the origin, that is the insertion. So one is relatively immobile, again, relatively, because you could make the point that that they're both moving, but one is going to move more than the other. The one that's moving more than the other, that's the insertion. The one that's more stationary, that moves less than the other, that's the origin. Yeah. All right, so the contractions help the skeleton move. Now, there are different types of muscles based on the types of motions that they produce. Ab and adductors are very easy to remember because if you remember, as you move towards the midline, you add the width gets bigger, so you add to it, so that's an adductor. And then the other one, therefore you're moving out, is an abductor, so towards the midline, add, away, ab, and then flexor and extensor, that I think should be pretty apparent. If you're decreasing the angle, your flexor, if you're increasing the angle, that's an extensor. And then for insertions, levators, depressors, move an insertion downward or upward. Upward, that's a levator. A depressor, move it downward. And rotators. So rotators, you'll have pronators, supinators. So pronators, supinators. If you're moving towards midline, away from the midline, rotating towards or away, pronators, supinators, and then sphincters will usually be smooth muscle, but not always, where they may be combined with smooth muscle. Those will control the diameter of an opening. That's a sphincter. Very good. A bit about the microanatomy of muscles. So the muscle is surrounded by tough connective tissue. If you've ever dissected a cat and you're trying to expose the muscle to this white, tough stuff, you got to sit there and pick it off. That is fascia. Beth Ulrich calls it fascia, but I'm American, so I say fascia. And fascia is more than just collagen. There's cells in there too. So when we talk about kind of manipulative movements of muscle, very often this manipulative movement is trying to get cells to make that collagen in a certain direction. And that can essentially with muscle that's damaged and that's fascia that's not quite lined up the way it should given the direction of the contraction of the muscle. And then below that you have muscle. The muscle itself is a unit. It's a unit of many muscle cells, and these units are in little bundles that are called fascicles. Fascicles. So the fascicles are surrounded by the fascia. Each fascicle is going to be surrounded by paramecium, as you can see here. And these paramecia surround the fascicles. Fascicles are bound together by an epimecium. And then that epimecium is surrounded by fascia. Fascia, epimecium, then the paramecium surrounds the fascicles. Then each of these fascicles contains these individual myofibrils. Oh, sorry. The Each of these will contain a particular muscle cell. So this muscle cells, if we bring this out here, so here's your fasciculus from the fascicle. And from the paramecium, you have divisions called endomecia. Endomecia will essentially section off each individual muscle cell. Muscle cells begin their life as myoblasts. Those myoblasts fuse to form a multinuclear cell. That is a skeletal muscle cell. Skeletal muscle cells are multinuclear. That's very important to remember. No. Well, it can. Sometimes. It depends on the size of the muscle. But they're long. They're very long, to be sure. Because of the contractile elements, the nuclei of skeletal muscles are always pushed to free of the cell. The cytosol of the cell is largely dominated by contractile elements. These are the so-called myofibrils. And the muscle membrane is special membrane, so it's called the sarcolemma. And these myofibrils have a repeating structure, and that repeating structure is called a sarcomere. A sarcomere. So if we take a little look, closer look at one of the muscle cells, we can see multiple nuclei pushed to the periphery. Here are your myofibrils. Your myofibrils are composed of many myofilaments. Myofilaments. You'll notice they have this repeating sarcomeric structure that repeats over and over and over again. This is important because the sarcomeres are the units that contract. And because the sarcomeres contract, that's how the whole muscle contracts. So when we look at contraction, we'll look at it at the level of the sarcomere. But please remember, this is occurring muscle-wide in all the sarcomeres. Now, each of your sarcomeres have a boundary, and this boundary is called a Z-disc. Z-disc. So my stupid mnemonic for muscle cells is that the sarcomeres go from Z to shining Z. And that tells you the border of the sarcomere, the Z-disc. The Z-disc is a very special structure. It's very, very important attachment structure because the contractile elements in these are going to attach at that Z-disc. So there's very, very important sets of proteins in that Z-disc that are structurally very significant. Now, if we turn this into a cartoon, we can see that between each Z-disc, there is an area that's very dark, and then an area that's very light here, and then an area on each end that is itself. So this whole thing is a sarcomere. This light piece in the middle is the H zone. And you can see that here in the CM picture. This is the H zone right in there. That's the H zone. Notice you got a line that goes down the middle. That line is called the M line, and that line's very easy to remember because this looks like it's a reflection of that. So it's as though there's a mirror in the middle of the sarcomere. That mirror is called the M line. The M line. And then this dark stuff with the H zone is called the A band. And then this light stuff here that spreads from one sarcomere to the other is the I band. H zone, A band, I band, Z band. Your I band will cross one Z band into another sarcomere. And when this muscle contracts, the Z bands are going to get closer together. And we'll see how that happens on Friday, quiz on Fridays over chapter 11. It'll be a paper quiz just like before, using the questions from the back of the book. Okay.
Dr. B, will you be emailing that quiz to those of us who couldn't make it to class or who
Yes,
might not be?
I can do that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I'll let you know what ends up happening with us.
Okay, yeah, you know, just do what you can, Meredith. It is
Yeah.
what it is. It's not your fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Thank
know
you.
you were just looking each day to get sick, right?
Yeah, of course. I woke up this morning, was like, you know what? I could be quarantined for 2 weeks.
Yeah, you knew quarantine. Yeah, of course you were.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you this, but my daughter, who plays tennis at Greenville, she got quarantined.
Yeah.
She called us every day over quarantine. Normally she's with her boyfriend. She doesn't call us, but she's so lonely. She's very social. Every day she
Right.
called us. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they would make us all go home just because it's one of our house members. And so if we quarantine here, if any one of us gets it, then we have to extend our quarantine and restart.
oh, for Pete's sake.
So we would all have to go home. So my parents are like, you can stay in the basement, we'll bring you food.
Okay.
We'll cross that bridge.
Yeah. Okay. See you later.
All right, bye-bye.